The reality of the life you experience on a daily basis is completely determined by your perceptions. Everything from how your coffee tastes in the morning, how upset you feel when some asshole cuts you off on the way to work, to the stress you have when you go to sleep at night because you're worried about how you're going to pay your college tuition. Somewhere out there, whether it's halfway across the world or maybe even in a parallel universe if you believe in that sort of thing, there's bound to be someone living an extremely similar life to yours. They have the same level of wealth, they have the same social status, they even look just like you. And yet they're happy and you're not. That's because the way they perceive the world around them is completely different from the way you do. The good news is you can actively train your mind to create the outlook you've always wanted in life. In this video, I'm going to talk about the science of how our brains work, why they work the way they do, some specific strategies to take control of your thought patterns, as well as applications for why you even need to be doing this in the first place. Let's get into it. Let's talk about the basic science of how our brains work. Don't worry, you don't have to take notes. There's not going to be a pop quiz. I'm going to keep it very high level, but I think it's important to understand the science behind your brain in order to believe that you can change it. Most people have heard of neurons. They're the fundamental cells that make up the brain. Every time you make a decision, think of a memory, or feel an emotion, millions of these neurons are exchanging information through something called a synapse. When you learn something new, new synapses are formed. When you repeat an action or a thought pattern, the connections involved are strengthened. And over the time, the brain forms what are called neural pathways. As we get older, more and more neural pathways are formed, and the ones we already have are solidified. It's been said that by the age of 35, 95% of who we are nothing more than a set of memorized behaviors and subconscious thoughts and reactions. The good news is those pathways we form are far from permanent. Your brain has what we call neuroplasticity. In other words, it has the ability to restructure itself. We'll talk more about how to take advantage of this a little bit later. So we understand on a basic level how our brains function when we make decisions or have emotional reactions, but you may be wondering why our brains operate like this in the first place. Given the complexity of the brain and human evolution, it's impossible to say for certain, but one strong theory rooted in evolutionary psychology suggests that we evolved this way as a survival mechanism. Think about our hunter-gatherer ancestors. If every time they ran into a lion, they had to consciously think about how to use their spear to fend off the animal, they wouldn't have stood much of a chance. Mind you, that's if they even had the time to decide whether the lion was a threat in the first place. Feeling these emotions and making these decisions faster than you can even blink was crucial for our survival. There are likely other factors at play as well. For one thing, our brains run more efficiently this way. They expend less calories by performing repeated actions than they would otherwise need to. Our brains burn somewhere around 20% of our daily calorie expenditure, so it's important for it to run as efficiently as possible. Let's talk about how all of this ties into habits. With all of the neural pathways being created, your program's sort of like a computer code. This computer code is made up of all the different habits that we've picked up over time. Habits are extremely powerful and can be both positive and negative. Take, for example, my daily breakfast when I was around 10 years old. I would come downstairs in the morning and I would make myself 3 Eggo waffles and a bowl of sugary cereal. The only decision I had to make was whether I wanted Cinnamon Toast Crunch or Reese's Puffs. Now, this probably isn't the best breakfast for a 10-year-old, but I did it one morning, I loved it, and I kept repeating it over and over again without even thinking about it. On the other hand, a positive habit I formed even before the age of 10 was brushing my teeth. If you grew up in a similar culture to mine, you were probably told from a young age that you should brush your teeth twice per day, once in the morning and once at night before bed. Sure, there have been times that I've skipped, but overwhelmingly, I brush my teeth twice a day, every day, and I never even debate whether I should do it or not. It's simply part of my life. Having a good understanding of how both good and bad habits are created in our brains is the first step toward being able to use habits to your advantage, rather than letting your life become controlled by them. If you want to learn more about this topic specifically, I highly recommend reading The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg and Atomic Habits by James Clear. The important aspect I want to highlight on this topic is that habits go well beyond what we tend to think of. I bring up habits and you probably think of things like, what time you get up in the morning, what your diet consists of, or your fingers that you can't stop cracking. But habits play a role on a deeper level, such as your regular emotional states. And we'll dive more into this idea in a minute. So what does this all mean, and why should you care? I want to talk about 3 specific areas of your life that could benefit from the process of rewiring your brain. The first one would be breaking bad habits and forming good ones. We just talked a bit about habits. You probably already knew that repeating a task over and over again could form a habit. But now that you know what's going on in your brain when you do this, I think you'll be better equipped to make conscious decisions about your habits. Even life's worst addictions fall under this umbrella. Whether it's alcohol, drugs, gambling, or sex, you can take back control if you make the decision to do so. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying many have done it before you, and you can do the same. Number 2 is all about curbing your negative emotional responses to leave more room for happiness and optimism in your life. We all have automatic emotional triggers throughout the day that we don't even think about. Like the example I brought up at the beginning. Some guy cuts you off, you're pissed. Your boss asks you to revise your SWOT analysis, you're annoyed. You find out your little brother makes more money than you do now, you're jealous. If your goal is to feel happier and to do so more often, these automatic emotional reactions are important to understand because it's impossible to feel happy while you're also feeling pissed, annoyed, or jealous. These feelings also tend to linger. Even though your SWOT analysis revisions only took 10 minutes, you still leave the office annoyed with your boss and you hold on to that for the rest of the night. Not to mention, these emotions typically serve no constructive purpose for us in the first place. They're simply habits our brain formed as a result of doing it repeatedly without keeping ourselves in check. When you understand you can actually change the way you react to the same objective thing taking place in your life, you're going to be in a much better position to fill your thoughts with happiness and optimism. The third and final application we're going to discuss is centered around our fear responses. Now, I believe fear belongs in a category of its own outside of our other emotional responses simply because of how overpowering it can be. This is everything from being scared to ride your bike without training wheels for the first time, to the crippling anxiety you feel before going in for a job interview, and everything in between and beyond that makes you fearful. Not many other emotions are so heavily intertwined with our physical state at the same time. Sweaty palms, increased heart rate, sometimes even being physically paralyzed with fear. We talk about things like panic attacks or the fight or flight response. Again, this goes back to our caveman ancestors, but for most of us in the comforts of modern life, how often do we actually find ourselves in life or death situations? More often than not, these archaic brain functions do us more harm than good. Imagine how you could improve your life if you could simply work up the courage to do things that you've always avoided simply out of fear. That all brings us to our last and arguably most important topic of discussion, which is how you can actually take this knowledge and apply it in a way that allows you to make significant and lasting change in your life. Studies have shown dozens of different tips and strategies that might play a role in stimulating neuroplasticity, but for the purposes of this video, I want to focus on 3 that have really resonated with me thus far. The first way that you can begin to train your mind is through meditation. If you've stuck with me this far in the video, but you're a left brain thinker like I am and you're kind of skeptical about things like meditation, please bear with me. I promise it's not woo like you might think it is. Meditation is all about being more conscious of your thoughts and perceptions. Meditation is arguably the most important piece of this puzzle, but the reason I bring it up first is because it's crucial in a chronological sense to all of this. Think about it. How are you going to go about making changes in your thinking if you're not mindful enough to be aware of your thoughts in the first place? Remember the guy who cut you off on the highway? How can you begin to reframe your reactions if you're too busy being pissed off and not giving any thought to noticing that you're pissed off in the first place? I use the road rage example ad nauseum because, for one, it's so relatable. But funny enough, when I first started meditating 7 or 8 years ago, the first change I noticed was how much more calm I was behind the wheel. There's so much more to unpack on the topic of meditation, and I'll go into more depth in other videos, but for now, I just want you to understand that meditation very much can be the foundation behind drastic change in your life. The second strategy you can implement right now is to change your environment. Now, hold on a second. Before you rush home and tell your wife you're moving the family to Oklahoma, understand that it doesn't have to be anything drastic. Did you ever rearrange your room as a child and all of a sudden get a burst of energy and just sort of put you in a better mood? There's something about new environments that trigger our brain to think differently. If you've cooked a recipe 100 times, but all of a sudden you're cooking that recipe in a different kitchen, you'll probably become more conscious about what you're doing. Some more environment altering tips include go to a new place for lunch, take a different route to work or on your daily walk, take a weekend trip to a city you've never been to, sit at a different table when you go to the coffee shop, and hear me out, even laying on the opposite side of the bed can spark new creative thoughts. Just know that if your wife is now on the side closer to the door, she's legally responsible for stopping any intruders that break in.
Hello, Drew.
The third and final strategy we're going to introduce is to do challenging things. This comes from a similar place of changing your environment. You're forcing yourself into new and uncomfortable situations, which means your brain has no choice but to create new neural pathways. And if you make a habit out of taking on challenging tasks rather than shying away from them, you're going to become more mentally tough than you ever thought possible. There's a whole host of other benefits that come as a result of doing hard things, and again, that's a topic for subsequent videos, but understand that it takes a disciplined mind to actively trade your bad habits and thought processes for good ones, and doing hard things on a daily basis will 100% help you build a disciplined mind. If there's one thing that you should take away from this video, it's the understanding that our lived experience is determined more by our perceptions than it is by anything objective happening in our life. And our perceptions are heavily influenced by the neural pathways that we've either consciously formed or simply let run rampant throughout our life. An analogy I came up with for this is to treat your mind like a garden. If you strategically plant fruits and vegetables that you enjoy while taking care to give them good soil, watering them every day, which includes the days that you don't feel like it, you're going to grow a beautiful and healthy garden. On the flip side, if you don't tend to your garden, you don't water your plants when they need it, or you let weeds sprout up everywhere, your garden is going to become overrun with things that you don't want, and the fruits and vegetables are going to suffer as a result. Not to mention, the more overrun it becomes, the more time and energy it will take to get it back to a healthy place. Become a gardener of your mind and reap what you sow. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe. I've got a whole lot more I plan on discussing revolving around practical ways to improve your life. See you on the next one.